Hi everyone. Um, Today I'm going to talk about writing body paragraphs and how to format them. I'm also going to show an example essay that I wrote for the class so you guys can have a good idea of what a really A+ paper would potentially look like. So you can find this example paper in this week's module. So if you go into week 10, writing body paragraphs in conclusion, down at the bottom you'll see example essay on video game addiction, body paragraph 1. So if you look in there, you can follow along with that, or you can watch the video. So at the top of this example paper, at the very top I have a heading with my name, the class name, the instructor's name, the date that it's due, and then I also have a heading up here with my last name and the page number. So those are all formatting parts. I have a title with a colon in it, and this title is Ending Video Game Addiction, the Community Approach. So I'm going to talk about titles and conclusions in my next lecture, but suffice to say it's a pretty strong title because it tells us what the topic is, and it gives us an inkling, an idea of what the thesis potentially is, that I'm solving this problem somehow involving community. Okay. The first part of this is the hook. So the first sentence is a hook, and in my particular hook I use a surprising and disturbing fact about the topic to entice the reader. So the essay starts, terrible news reports of people literally dying from playing video games too long, or of parents neglecting their children, even to the point of accidental death, due to addiction to video games, has sparked a worldwide debate over the problem. At the end of this sentence I have parenthetical citations. So I have the last names of two authors, Spencer and LeJacq. If a reader wanted to know where I got this information, they could go down to my Works Cited page. So we could look up Spencer, and here he is, Spencer Richard, in quotations, the title of the essay, Man Dies After 7-Day Computer Game Session, the telegraph, the date, and the URL. So you can open it up if you want to. You can copy that, put it on your browser, and voila, here's the article. Okay. So let's go back to the first sentence. So I have a hook, I have a citation backing up where I got the information for that hook. Here's the next sentence. This concern has especially grown in the last 20 years with the rise of online platforms, allowing for larger online multiplayer games and the advent of smartphones. So this question in this paragraph answers the intro question of when did it start? When did the problem start? Okay. The next part of this, I integrate a quotation from an essay titled Warning Signs Appear Along the Road to Video Game Addiction to give context of how long this has been going on for and why it's happening. The quote is, as technology becomes a large part of many consumers' everyday lives, the risk of overexposure to new advances grows for people of all ages. Children, however, may be especially at risk of becoming too dependent on devices and outlets, including video games and internet. A couple of things about this quote. One, you'll see these marks right here. Those are ellipses. And ellipses indicate that I've taken something out of the quotation. If you look at this original quote, so if we find LeJacq, oh, excuse me, that's mislabeled. It should be Leclerc, right here. So we're going to change that one. If you open up the article, this is part of the first paragraph. And I keep everything exactly the same up until I say becoming, especially at risk of becoming, and then in the article, or in my quotation, are especially becoming at risk of becoming too dependent on devices and outlets. So devices and outlets, and then I take out such as television sets, cell phones, music players. I take that out because I just want to focus on video games. And to tell the reader that I did that, I use these 3 dots, which is an ellipses. The next thing I do is to make the sentence grammatically correct, I put in brackets, including. So this tells the reader that I've added or I've changed something. So they can go in and look at the article for themselves. The other thing to note is that this quote is indented and the quotation marks are removed because it's longer than 4 sentences. It's longer than 4 lines. It's just a part of MLA style. Okay. So I've answered, I've got a hook, I've answered the question of when did it start, and I talk about why the problem is important. So though humans have always played games and often spent large amount of time and energy on them, the growing size of the problem of video game addiction in the past 20 years makes it important to address. Need a comma there, because it's a parenthetical clause. Okay, so the next paragraph is still part of my introduction. Something to keep in mind is that you might be able to cover all of this information in a single paragraph. It might take you 2, it might take you 3. The goal is not necessarily to make it as long as possible, it's to cover the information clearly enough so that your reader can understand your thesis. So for my thesis, I have to explain when did this problem start, how bad is it? So in this next paragraph, I talk about what is the problem, how do we define it? So my topic sentence is, there's been some debate on how to define video game addiction and argument over whether it's a unique psychological affliction, okay? Then I introduce a source that gives a definition. But Dr. Samuel Charmat, a physicist with a subspecialty in treating addiction, gives one definition by explaining those that addicted to video games, and then I have another quote. Again, notice that I've indented this whole side, and that the period comes before the quotation, the parenthetical citation, excuse me. I don't have the citation in this quote because I've already mentioned Jennifer LeClaire is the author of this article right here. So the first part of this, I provide a definition, and then I go on to explain that the American Psychiatric Association, the APA, actually doesn't consider video games to be potentially addicting. They classify video game addiction as falling under a type of like gambling addiction. It creates what they call a compulsion loop, where you do an activity and it gives you a reward which encourages you to do the activity again. Basically, it releases a little burst of the chemical dopamine in your brain, causing you to want to do the activity again because it's pleasurable. And if you do this enough, it can become addictive. So they argue that it's not actually a thing. The World Health Organization argues that it is. At the end of this, I basically say that even though, you know, the American Psychiatric Association doesn't argue that video game addiction is a thing, I think that there's enough evidence to say that it is. On the bigger side of this paragraph answers the intro question, what is it? And it also gives us, you know, the context. What is the argument? What is the context of the debate? Well, people are debating about what the thing is, and they're also debating about its definition. Okay, my third intro paragraph talks about how big is the problem. And I give a couple of citations here about how many people are potentially afflicted with video game addiction. I also admit at the end of it that some people say these numbers are inaccurate, but again, I argue that from the amount of people talking about this and being concerned about it, that there is a problem, even if we don't know exactly how big it is. Okay? So these 3 paragraphs are all part of my introduction. And as I said, your intro doesn't have to be this big. I have some very long quotes here that you don't necessarily need to have, but you do want to try to answer these questions of, okay, have a hook, when did the problem start, what is the problem, what is the context of the debate, how long has it been a problem. Okay, here is my thesis statement. It's a 3-part thesis. My thesis says, we can reduce the prevalence of video game addiction by increasing the education of students about it in primary and high school educate parents and educators in those same levels about how to deal with it, and provide more affordable psychiatric care for those who want or need help.